The isolated Alcatraz prison in the middle of the ocean was a harsh prison, specializing in treating the most recalcitrant prisoners, and was the terror of those who intended to escape. In 1775, when he first set foot on the island, a Spanish explorer named this rugged island La Isla de los Alcatrazes, meaning Pelican Island. 3/4 of a century later, the 13th President of the United States, Millard Fillmore, transferred the island to the military, and it became the site of the first lighthouse on the West Coast. Welcome to Detective TV channel. Due to its isolated, fortress-like terrain, Alcatraz quickly became considered a safe place to store cannons, military ammunition, and dangerous criminals. As early as 1861, the military used the island to detain prisoners of war from the Civil War. By 1906, San Francisco and the state of California used the island to detain civilian prisoners. In 1933, the U.S. Department of Justice purchased the 9-hectare island and officially turned it into a federal penitentiary. Alcatraz was reserved for the most hard-to-treat prisoners in other federal prisons. It was dubbed the last prison, for the worst of the worst, without hope of rehabilitation, or the toughest prison on the planet. Alcatraz is also nicknamed The Rock. Located just 2 kilometers from San Francisco, the water surrounding it is quite icy, fluctuating between 4 to 10 degrees Celsius, with strong ripples. This, along with iron bars, strict rules, and guard towers with heavily armed guards, made the prison a deadly haunt for any prisoner who wanted to escape. The main detention area of Alcatraz is a 150-meter-long concrete building. In 1910, when it was built for the equivalent of $7 million today, it was considered the longest concrete building in the world at the time. Alcatraz had 336 cells measuring 2.7 m long, 1.5 m wide, and 2.1 m high, each with a cot, sink, and toilet. At its peak, there were only 302 prisoners, ensuring each person had a separate room, minimizing fights and escapes. The 4 rights of each prisoner were clothing, 3 meals a day, housing and medical, dental, and mental care. Additional rights for prisoners with good behavior included going to the library, playing softball or baseball, going to church, listening to the radio, watching movies in the auditorium, and playing chess, checkers, or dominoes. One reason prisoners wanted to be transferred to Alcatraz was that the food was good and they could eat as much as they wanted. The menu from 1946 included stewed fruit, cereal, milk, bread, and coffee for breakfast. Lunch, the biggest meal of the day, consisted of soup and beef, pork with vegetables, bread and tea, boiled corn, and apple pie. Dinner also included meat, soup, vegetables, and bread with fruit, cake, or fruit jelly for dessert. This was the idea of the first warden, James Aloysius Johnston. He believed that bad food led to irritable and riotous inmates. The most notorious of all luxuries was hot water. No other prison in the United States at the time offered this privilege, leading many inmates from other prisons to sometimes apply to be housed at Alcatraz. What they did not know was that this humane gesture was a tactic. Everyone knew that the sea water surrounding Alcatraz was ice cold all year round. Getting used to the warm water would reduce escape ideas, or even if they tried, they would soon freeze to death from heat stroke. Warden James Aloysius also realized that many people were in prison because they lacked the skills to do honest work. So he proposed that the Justice Department make it possible for inmates to take correspondence courses offered by the University of California. Inmates could choose from 19 different courses, ranging from elementary English literature and elementary algebra to poultry farming. Prison authorities believed that prisoners needed constant labor, otherwise they would get bored and become violent. They could help cook and clean and maintain the docks. But the vast majority worked in a large factory on the island, making things like shoes, gloves, rubber mats, brooms, brushes, raincoats, and furniture, similar to those used in prisons today. They also helped repair buoys used in the bay, and during World War II, they did their patriotic duty by making cargo nets for the Navy. Many Alcatraz guards chose to live on the island itself. The rent was cheap, the commute was short, and they were allowed to bring their families. This meant that children lived in close proximity to some of the country's worst criminals. 100 children grew up on Alcatraz. Some were even born there. They spent their childhoods playing baseball, flying kites, and rollerblading. The only difference was that if they were on the playground and the alarm went off, the kids had to run straight home and were forbidden from owning toy guns. They even interacted with the inmates, waving or talking to them as they picked up trash or fixed plumbing in the guards' houses. One said she had a few criminals repair her shoes and sign their names. In addition to all these comforts, Alcatraz had a particularly strict set of rules. Guards would take roll calls 13 times a day to prevent escape attempts. Prisoners were initially not allowed to speak, not even mumble to themselves, but in 1950 the rule was abolished. Failure to comply with the rules resulted in solitary confinement in D Block for 7 to 19 days. But the worst was being locked in a small, steel-clad room with no light and no toilet, no mattress, nothing but a small hole in the floor for waste. Prisoners were sent there to strip naked and were given only one meal a day with very poor food. Another measure was that at night, when all the prisoners were preparing to go to sleep, the guards would line up in the yard or on the roof, shooting continuously at the dummies placed everywhere. They called this basic shooting practice, but in fact it was to deter those who wanted to escape. After the deafening barrage of bullets at night, when the prisoners woke up in the morning, they would see hundreds of dummies with holes in their heads, eyes, and chests, lying in piles in the yard, which they called a mental haunting. In popular culture, Alcatraz has been listed as one of the top 5 haunted places in California. In addition, this place is also famous for the suicides of prisoners, killing guards and killing each other. Among the most famous inmates of Alcatraz is the most notorious gangster of all time, Al Capone, public enemy number 1 of America. The reason why his brother was sent to Alcatraz was not because he was unrehabilitated, but because he used money to manipulate the entire prison system where he was previously held, Atlanta. At that time, Al Capone bribed all the guards and in return received many privileges, including a constant flow of visitors. When he arrived at Alcatraz, he was the same, but he did not succeed. On the contrary, he was assigned many heavy tasks. But when he rested, he was still able to fight with his fellow prisoners. During his more than 4 years in Alcatraz, Al Capone begged the warden to allow him to form a small band, consisting of 12 people called the Rock Islanders. They practiced during the week in the barbershop, and sometimes they held concerts on Sunday afternoons. Al Capone played the banjo, tenor guitar, and mandolin, and later wrote handwritten letters to his son, boasting that he knew 500 songs. He even composed his own music, with a love song called Madonna Mia, published posthumously in 2009. Al Capone was released from prison in November 1939 and lived in Miami until his death in 1947 at the age of 48 from syphilis. One of the letters Al Capone wrote to his son later sold for $62,500 at auction in 2016. Everyone knows that Alcatraz is the most secure prison in the United States, so most inmates want to obediently serve their sentences and get out. In the 29 years the prison operated, only 36 men participated in 14 escapes. None of them were successful. However, 23 people were caught red-handed, 6 were shot dead on the spot, and at least 2 drowned and froze to death in the bay. The other bodies were never found. The most infamous escape attempt, made into a film, involved the 3 prisoners using simple tools such as spoons, coins, and an electric drill made from a stolen vacuum cleaner motor to chisel away the concrete around the vent. The escape route was through a ventilation fan. The prisoners removed the fan and motor, replacing them with a steel grill and leaving a shaft large enough for the prisoners to step into. On their beds, they placed paper mannequins with hair stolen from a barbershop. Over the weeks, the escapees also stole 50 raincoats, making an inflatable raft. On the evening of June 11, 1962, they escaped through a roof vent and left Alcatraz. No one knows if they made it to shore alive. In the 17 years we have been investigating the case, there has been no credible evidence that the 3 prisoners are still alive, either in the United States or abroad, the FBI said. However, the U.S. Marshal Service announced that they would continue to investigate until the prisoners were either dead or 99 years old. Alcatraz was eventually closed for several reasons. First, everything on the island had to be shipped from the mainland, every meal, every magazine, every pack of cigarettes. This made Alcatraz more expensive to operate than mainland prisons. In addition, the old concrete buildings were increasingly deteriorating due to constant exposure to salt water, costing the government millions of dollars in repairs. After the 1962 prison break, people wondered what the point of operating the prison was when there were actually prisoners who could escape from Alcatraz. In 1963, the prison was closed permanently. Alcatraz has since reopened as a public museum, a major tourist attraction in San Francisco, attracting about 1.5 million visitors annually with admission ranging from $25 to $41 depending on age.